What if the Roman Empire had stretched not just westward into Gaul and Britain, but eastward into Persia, India, and beyond? What if Julius Caesar, instead of falling to daggers on the Ides of March, had lived to march his legions toward the riches of the Orient? How different would our world look today? This is not just a story about conquest. It's about ambition, fate, and the razor-thin line between history as we know it and the history that almost was. Imagine Rome, not confined to the Mediterranean, but holding the trade routes of the Silk Road, touching the edges of China, reshaping religion, politics, and culture for millennia to come. In this video, we'll journey into that alternate past. We'll stand beside Caesar as he plots his grand campaign, watch his armies clash against the Parthians, and follow the empire as it reaches into lands no Roman ever dreamed of controlling. But be warned, this isn't just a what-if. It's a mirror held up to history, showing us how fragile the world we inherited truly was. So, if you've ever wondered what the Roman world might have looked like had Caesar lived a little longer, make sure you stay until the end, because the story you're about to hear could change how you see history forever. And don't forget, you love exploring the mysteries of history. Subscribe and join us on this journey. The dream of the East. Have you ever wondered what might have happened if Julius Caesar had not fallen beneath the knives of his fellow Romans? And what if, instead of his blood staining the steps of the Senate, it had been Parthian sand crunching beneath his marching legions? The world knows Caesar as a conqueror of Gaul, a dictator who remade Rome, and a victim of betrayal. But what history often forgets is the ambition that lingered in his mind during those final months. Caesar was not done. His gaze had already shifted eastward, toward the ancient enemy of Rome, the Parthian Empire. He envisioned a campaign that would outshine even Alexander the Great. And if fate had granted him time, his armies might have carved a Roman world, stretching from the Atlantic to the Indus. Picture the scene in 44 BCE. Rome is restless, both triumphant and uneasy. Caesar has returned from civil war, master of the Republic in everything but name. His triumphs have dazzled the people, for triumphal parades. Treasure from across the Mediterranean, prisoners paraded in chains. The streets echo with cheers for Caesar, the godlike conqueror. Yet whispers of monarchy hang in the air, and enemies circle in the shadows. And yet, Caesar is not focused on them. Not really. While senators whisper of liberty and daggers are sharpened in secret, Caesar is already mapping routes east. He dreams of Persia, of Babylon, of reclaiming the glory Rome once sought under Crassus, whose legions were annihilated by Parthian horse archers at Carrhae. That humiliation still burned in the Roman soul, and Caesar planned to erase it once and for all. But the Parthians were not his final goal. According to ancient sources, Caesar envisioned a campaign that would push beyond Parthia, through the lands of the Scythians, down into the riches of India, and perhaps, if you believe the rumors, even to the edge of China. This was not merely conquest. It was destiny, a chance to rival Alexander, to merge east and west under a single Roman banner. Imagine him standing in his tent, maps unfurled, advisors gathered. To one side, the known world of Rome, Gaul, Spain, Egypt, the Mediterranean Sea cradling its empire. To the other, the lands of mystery and legend, Persia, the Silk Road, and kingdoms Rome had only heard whispers of. His eyes linger there, on the unclaimed horizon. For Caesar, the future was not Rome itself. It was what lay beyond. But let us step back. To understand what Caesar wanted, we must first understand the lure of the East. For centuries, the Roman imagination had been haunted by Alexander the Great. Here was a man who, in little more than a decade, had marched from Greece to the heart of India, carving an empire that blended East and West. His name was spoken with awe across the Mediterranean, and even Caesar himself, as a young man, was said to have wept when he saw a statue of Alexander. He wept because, at his own age, Alexander had conquered the world, while Caesar had achieved nothing of comparable greatness. That sense of destiny haunted him. And so, by the time Caesar had secured his dictatorship, he had already set his sights on surpassing Alexander. The Parthians, powerful and proud, stood as the first obstacle. They were masters of cavalry, horse archers whose arrows had shattered Roman pride at Carrhae nearly 2 decades earlier. Rome had never truly avenged that loss, and Caesar saw his chance to not only restore Roman honor, but to launch a campaign that would unite his people under a common enemy, while also distracting them from his ever-growing power at home. Think about it. Caesar, with his genius for strategy, his battle-hardened legions, and his unmatched charisma, leading Rome against the very empire that had humiliated them. The stakes could not have been higher. A victory would have elevated Caesar to near-divine status. Defeat, well, Caesar never considered defeat an option. But here's where history takes a fateful twist. Because, just as these plans were forming, just as the legions prepared to march, fate intervened on the Ides of March. The daggers of Brutus and Cassius ended not only Caesar's life, but the dream of Rome in the East. Or did they? In this alternate story, let us imagine Caesar survives. Perhaps the conspiracy falters. Perhaps a loyal hand warns him in time. Perhaps Caesar, ever the gambler, slips fate's noose for one more roll of history's dice. Now picture Rome, in the months that follow. Caesar, alive, announces his grand campaign. His legions, veterans of Gaul and the civil wars, prepare once more for conquest. The Senate, stripped of power, can do little but watch. The people, eager for glory and plunder, roar with approval. The march begins. First stop, Parthia. The very name sent shivers through Roman veterans. But under Caesar, fear turns to hunger for revenge. The Roman war machine, perfected in Gaul, adapted to every foe, now faces its greatest challenge. The deserts of Mesopotamia stretch ahead. The horsemen of Parthia ready their arrows, and history itself holds its breath. But here's the question I want you to hold in your mind. If Caesar had truly marched east, would Rome have conquered, or would the sands of Persia have swallowed them whole, as it had swallowed so many armies before? And what would it have meant, not just for Rome, but for the entire history of the world? Because if Caesar succeeded, the Roman Empire, we know, the one that gave us roads, laws, Latin, Christianity, and eventually collapsed into fragments, might have been only the beginning. An empire stretching from Britain to India, from the Atlantic to the edge of China, could have rewritten the very map of civilization. Caesar versus the Parthian Empire. What happens when the unstoppable force of Caesar's legions meets the immovable power of the Parthian cavalry? Could Rome finally erase its greatest humiliation? Or would Caesar's dream of empire die in the burning sands of Mesopotamia? The stage is set. The Ides of March has passed. But this time, Caesar lives. The conspiracy fails. Daggers fall short. And Caesar, perhaps wounded but unbroken, rises stronger than ever. His enemies slink away. His allies rally. And Rome becomes a city buzzing with a singular anticipation. The East. The people are ecstatic. They chant Caesar's name as he promises vengeance for Carrhae, where thousands of Roman soldiers perished. There eagles the sacred standards of Rome, captured and paraded in Parthian triumph. For Romans, the shame of Carrhae was not just military, it was personal, a wound to the soul of the empire. And Caesar, with his unmatched gift for stirring hearts, transforms that humiliation into a rallying cry. Imagine the scene at the Forum, as Caesar addresses the crowd. His voice, seasoned by years of command, rolls like thunder. Rome will avenge her sons. The eagles will fly again. And beyond Parthia, the world awaits. The crowd erupts. Senators glare with fear, but their voices are drowned out by the roar of Rome's streets. Preparations begin on a massive scale. Supplies are gathered, weapons forged, and legions readied. Caesar does not plan a half-hearted war. He plans a conquest worthy of Alexander. His strategy is meticulous. He knows the Parthians rely on their cavalry, swift horse archers, who can harass and destroy heavy infantry in open desert. But Caesar is no ordinary general. He adapts. He trains his legions for flexibility, drilling them in new formations, integrating auxiliary cavalry from Gaul and Spain, and recruiting archers from Crete and slingers from the Balearic Islands. Visualize it. Roman camps alive with activity. Soldiers sharpening swords, cavalry horses snorting in their pens, maps marked with routes across Armenia and Mesopotamia. Caesar himself walks among the men, speaking not as a distant commander but as a He knows every soldier's loyalty is bound not by fear but by devotion. They would follow him into the ends of the earth. Meanwhile, across the desert, the Parthians prepare. Their king, Ides II, remembers well how Roman arrogance once crumbled at Carrhae. He believes his horsemen can do it again. Swift as the wind, deadly with the bow, the Parthian cavalry has no equal in the open steppe. To them, Rome is lumbering, slow, chained to its heavy infantry. They scoff at Caesar's ambition. But Caesar is no Crassus. He studies his enemy, anticipating their tactics. He knows they will try to lure him into the open desert, to bleed his forces with arrows until thirst and fatigue finish the job. Caesar instead chooses a different path. He allies with Armenia, securing mountain passes and supply lines, forcing the Parthians to fight on terrain less suited to their style. He builds fortified camps every night, making ambushes nearly impossible. He turns every Roman weakness into a strength. Now, imagine the first great clash. The Roman legions march into Mesopotamia, the sun blazing overhead, shields gleaming like bronze mirrors. Dust rises in clouds as the Parthian horsemen sweep across the horizon, arrows whistling through the air. At Carrhae, this would have been disaster, but under Caesar, the Romans counter, shields locked into testudo formations, arrows glancing harmlessly off. When the horsemen swooped closer, Caesar unleashes his cavalry, Gallish riders charging headlong, Iberian horsemen flanking, auxiliaries harassing with javelins. The battlefield transforms into chaos, but Caesar thrives in chaos. He rallies his men with words and gestures, turning every moment into an opportunity. At last, a breakthrough Roman infantry surges forward, capturing ground inch by inch, while Parthian cavalry, unable to pierce the Roman defenses, begins to falter. And then, the moment of triumph, the captured Roman standards of Carrhae, taken decades earlier, are reclaimed. Imagine the cheer that erupts from the legions as those sacred eagles rise once more into Roman hands. It is not just a victory, it is redemption. Rome's greatest shame has been avenged. But Caesar is not satisfied with vengeance. His ambition does not end with Parthia's defeat. He knows the Parthian Empire is vast, its cities rich, its trade routes the lifeblood between East and West. Conquering it would mean more than glory. It would mean control of the Silk Road, the power to dominate trade flowing from India and even distant China. Rome would no longer be a Mediterranean empire, it would be a global one. So the campaign continues. Babylon falls. Seleucia opens its gates. The Tigris and Euphrates, rivers of ancient civilizations, now carry Roman supply ships. Caesar does what Alexander once did. He cuts deep into the heart of Persia. But unlike Alexander, he brings with him not just conquest, but the machinery of Roman governance. Roads, fortresses, colonies. The East begins to Romanize its cultures woven into Caesar's grand vision of empire. Pause for a moment and consider this. What would a Romanized Mesopotamia have meant for the world? What happens when Roman law, Roman engineering, Roman roads, and Roman legions take root in the cradle of civilization? How would Christianity have spread differently in a world where Rome controlled not just Judea, but Babylon and beyond? The questions multiply, and with them, the suspense grows. Because Caesar is not finished. Parthia was merely the beginning. His gaze now turns further east to the lands Alexander could not hold. To India, where empires of unimaginable wealth await. Caesar in India. Rome meets the East. What happens when the legions of Rome, forged in the fields of Gaul and the deserts of Parthia, meet the war elephants and kingdoms of India? Could Caesar, the man who never accepted defeat, succeed where even Alexander? The Parthian campaign has ended in triumph. Roman standards once lost are now restored. Mesopotamian cities bend the knee, and Caesar stands at the zenith of his power. Yet for him, victory is never an endpoint. It is merely a stepping stone. The maps spread before him now show more than Persia. They show the lands of the Indus, the fabled wealth of India, and beyond that, whispers of empires no Roman had ever seen. To the Roman imagination, India was a place of legend. Gold flowed like rivers. Spices perfumed the air. Elephants roamed in armor, and philosophers spoke of worlds beyond comprehension. Traders told stories of gems that burned like captured stars, and fabrics so fine they seemed woven of light. To Caesar, these were not mere tales. They were opportunities. He would not stop at avenging Carrhae. He would outdo Alexander himself by bringing India under Rome's banner. Picture the Roman army marching eastward. No longer only legions, but a fusion of cultures. Parthian defectors now ride alongside Gaulish cavalry. Eastern engineers joined Roman builders to construct bridges across the Tigris and forts in the mountains. Supply lines stretched like veins of empire, pumping resources forward. Rome is transforming into something larger, something unrecognizable. As Caesar binds east and west together through sheer will. The march is grueling. The deserts give way to mountains. The mountains to fertile plains. And finally, the rich river valleys of the Indus. The air is heavy with monsoon rains. Alien to the Romans who had grown accustomed to Mediterranean sun, strange animals, tigers, rhinoceroses, elephants, stir awe and fear among the soldiers. Every step deeper into India feels like a step into myth itself. And then, the first confrontation. Caesar's legions encounter the armies of an Indian kingdom, perhaps descendants of the Mauryan traditions, or rulers of smaller dynasties along the Indus. These are not Parthian horsemen, but warriors with war elephants. Beasts towering above men, their tusks armored, their massive feet pounding the earth like thunder. To a Roman soldier, the sight is terrifying. To Caesar, it is a challenge. He remembers how Pyrrhus of Epirus once brought elephants against Rome centuries earlier, and how the Romans, though shaken, adapted and overcame. Now, under his command, the legions do the same. Shields are locked tight, javelins fly, and specialized troops target the elephants with precision. Auxiliaries harry the flanks, while Caesar himself directs with calm brilliance. Slowly, the tide turns. The elephants panic, rampaging back through their own lines, and the Indian army breaks. Victory is Rome's, but at a cost. The legions are battered, supply lines stretched thin, and morale tested. Yet Caesar knows the power of spectacle. He parades captured elephants through camp, not only to awe his men, but to show that even the beasts of India can be tamed by Rome. His soldiers, weary but loyal, cheer their commander. Once again, Caesar has led them through fear into triumph. But here lies the deeper question. Could Rome truly hold India? Conquest is one thing. Administration is another. The subcontinent is vast, its kingdoms diverse, its cultures ancient and resilient. Even Alexander, at the height of his power, found India to be a land too vast, too distant, too different to govern effectively. His armies mutinied on the banks of the Hyphasis River, refusing to march further. Would Caesar's legions do the same? Imagine the murmurs in camp. Veterans who had marched with Caesar for years now whisper of home. The riches of India tempt them, but the endless march begins to wear on their spirits. Letters from Rome speak of unrest, senators plotting, rivals rising. Some ask, why chase shadows of Alexander when Rome itself needs ruling? Caesar, ever the master of persuasion, addresses them. He does not command, he inspires. Standing before his men, he speaks of legacy, of the glory that will echo for millennia if they press on. He invokes the gods, destiny, the memory of Alexander and the promise of wealth beyond imagining. His men, swayed once more, roar in assent. The march continues. Now picture Rome's influence spreading across the Indus Valley. Colonies planted in fertile lands, Roman coins traded in Indian markets, Latin mingling with Sanskrit, scholars exchange philosophisticism meeting Buddhism, Roman law intertwining with Indian tradition. A hybrid culture begins to emerge, one that could change the course of global civilization. And yet, shadows loom. For the deeper Rome pushes into India, the more fragile its hold becomes. Distance from Rome stretches governance thin. Rivals at home see Caesar's absence as opportunity. Cleopatra in Egypt eyes her chance to expand influence. In Rome itself, senators brood over Caesar's growing godlike power, fearing that when he returns, there will be no republic left, only a throne. Here lies the great tension of this alternate history. Caesar conquers the East, but at what cost? The further he marches, the more tenuous his grip on Rome becomes. Will his empire endure, or will it fracture under the weight of ambition? As Caesar presses deeper, word reaches him of new powers beyond India, mighty dynasties in the distant East, the Han of China, who command vast armies and control the other end of the Silk Road. The idea seizes his imagination. Could Rome and China, the two greatest civilizations of the ancient world, meet not through whispers and trade caravans, but face to face across the battlefield or the banquet hall? The meeting of empires, Rome and China. What happens when two of the greatest civilizations of the ancient world, Rome and Han China, stand on the brink of contact? Would they clash in war or unite in trade, reshaping the destiny of the entire globe? The Roman legions have marched further than anyone thought possible. Persia has fallen, India has bent beneath their advance, and Caesar stands at the pinnacle of human ambition. Yet ambition is a fire that never rests. Even as his men savor plunder and rest in newly conquered lands, Caesar looks eastward still. There, beyond the Himalayas, beyond the deserts of Central Asia, lies another empire, whispered of in rumor and legend, the Han. For Romans, China was known only through fragmented tales carried by Silk Road merchants. They called it Syrica, the land where silk was spun from worms and fabrics, more precious than gold, flowed westward in caravans. Its emperors, though distant, were described as wielding armies of unimaginable size, palaces glittering with jade and bronze, and a bureaucracy as efficient as any in Rome. To Caesar, this was not myth, but destiny. If Alexander had dreamed of reaching the edge of the world, then Caesar would outdo him by touching the other great empire of mankind. The march into Central Asia begins. Imagine the sight. Roman legions trudging across endless steppes, their eagles gleaming beneath alien skies. Alongside them ride Sarmatian horsemen, recruited from conquered tribes, their armor flashing, their lances poised. The roads vanish, replaced by tracks carved through wind and sand. Supply lines stretch to breaking, But Caesar adapts. He builds fortified depots, strikes alliances with nomadic tribes, and bends geography itself to Rome's will. The journey is not just a military conquest, but a cultural odyssey. Roman soldiers encounter Buddhist monks for the first time. Their orange robes and calm teachings bewildering yet fascinating. They meet caravans carrying silk, jade, and spices, goods so rare that back in Rome, a single bolt of silk could fetch the price of an estate. Caesar realizes he is not merely conquering land, he is stepping into a network of civilizations bound by trade and ideas. But the march is not without peril. The deserts of Central Asia are merciless. Sandstorms bury men alive, wells run dry, and mirages lure the desperate. Bands of nomadic warriors strike in the night, testing Roman discipline. Each step forward feels like a gamble against nature itself. Yet Caesar thrives in adversity. He rallies his men with words that echo across the campfires. "We are Rome, where we stand. The world bows." At last, emissaries from the Han arrive, curious, cautious, their silks flowing in the wind. They are astonished to see these strangers from the far west, disciplined, armored, unlike any people they had encountered before. Communication is halting, filtered through layers of interpreters. But the message is clear. Two great empires have found each other. Now pause and imagine the possibilities. What if Caesar, ever the diplomat as much as the general, had sat across a table from envoys of the Han Emperor? Would they have seen each other as rivals or partners? Would Rome and China have forged an alliance that dominated the world, linking the Mediterranean to the Pacific in a chain of power and trade? Or would they have seen in each other the reflection of their own ambition to suns in the same sky, destined to collide? Picture the potential clash. Roman legions, masters of discipline and engineering, against Chinese armies equipped with crossbows, cavalry, and siege weapons of terrifying ingenuity. The battles would have been unlike anything history had ever seen. A collision of military systems developed in isolation, but perfected over centuries. The outcome, impossible to predict. Caesar might have sought conquest, but he was also pragmatic. He may well have chosen trade over war, knowing that an alliance could enrich Rome beyond measure. And what of the world that would follow? Imagine Roman roads stretching all the way to the Pacific. Imagine Chinese silk flooding not just into Rome but across provinces from Gaul to Egypt. Imagine philosophies intermingling: Confucianism, debated alongside Stoicism, Taoist mysticism blending with Roman pragmatism. The global culture we think of as modern might have been born 2,000 years earlier. Yet, as with all ambition, shadows lengthen. Caesar's men, hardened but weary, wonder how much further they can march. The Senate back in Rome grows restless. Cleopatra waits in Egypt, watching events unfold with her own ambitions. Every step further east weakens Caesar's grip on the heart of his empire. Victory in the east may come at the cost of control in the west. And so, the suspense deepens. Will Caesar achieve his dream of uniting the known world, or will his empire collapse under the strain of distance and overreach? History has shown that no empire, no matter how mighty, can stretch forever. Even Alexander turned back. Even the Han struggled to control their farthest borders. Can Caesar truly succeed where all others failed? The question lingers like a storm on the horizon. And in Part 5, we will explore the ultimate fate of this alternate empire. What would have become of Rome, of Christianity, of the very world itself, if Caesar had not died on the Senate floor, but had instead lived to unite East and West under one rule? The dream nears its climax. But every dream has a price. The world that might have been. What if the modern world you know, the languages you speak, the religions you follow, the nations you live in, had been shaped not by centuries of fragmented empires, but by one man's unbroken dream of conquest? What if Julius Caesar had truly united East and West under Rome's banner? By now, in our alternate history, Caesar has accomplished what seemed impossible. He has conquered Parthia, subdued India, and pushed Rome's influence all the way to the fringes of China. For the first time in history, a single empire spans nearly the entirety of the known world. And yet, this achievement raises a question even greater than the victories themselves. What kind of world would have been born from Caesar's success? Let's begin with religion. In our history, Christianity emerged in a fractured Roman Empire, spreading slowly, often persecuted, before eventually becoming the dominant faith of the West. But imagine Caesar's empire, stretching from Judea to Babylon to India. Would Christianity ever have taken root in the same way? Perhaps it would have been overshadowed by a fusion of Roman polytheism, Eastern mysticism, and Indian philosophy. Imagine a Roman state religion infused with Stoicism, Buddhism, and Taoism a spiritual blend, uniting East and West centuries before such ideas were conceivable. The world's faiths might not be divided as they are today, but intertwined, born in a global empire that recognized many gods and many truths. Now consider politics. The Republic as we know it would have been finished irreversibly. Caesar, having conquered half the world, would have returned not as dictator, but as emperor in all but name. The Senate, already reduced to a ceremonial shell, would become a puppet. A dynasty would form, not just ruling the Mediterranean but administering provinces across 3 continents. Roman law would extend into Mesopotamia, India, and perhaps beyond, creating a shared legal and administrative system that might have lasted for centuries, even millennia. Think of the culture that might have emerged. Greek philosophy, Roman engineering, Persian administration, Indian mathematics, and Chinese science all under one imperial framework. Roads linking Spain to India, aqueducts spanning deserts, libraries collecting the wisdom of every corner of the globe. The Renaissance, which came 1,000 years after Rome's fall, might have arrived in Caesar's lifetime. The Industrial Revolution might not have waited until the 18th century, but blossomed in the ancient world. Humanity could have leaped forward by centuries, perhaps even millennia. And what of language? Latin might not have remained confined to Europe. It could have fused with Eastern tongues, creating a universal hybrid language. Imagine a world where Latin roots mingle with Sanskrit and Chinese, forming a lingua franca spoken across continents. Modern languages, as we know them, English, French, Hindi, Mandarin, might never have existed. Instead, one great world language, born of empire, might have bound humanity together. But let us not romanticize too quickly. Every dream has its shadows. An empire so vast might have crushed local identities, erasing cultures beneath the weight of Roman order. Resistance would have been inevitable. Revolts in India, unrest in Persia, rebellions in Judea would have tested Rome's grip. Could even Caesar have maintained unity across such distance and diversity? Or would his empire, like Alexander's before, have shattered the moment his hand was gone? And what of Caesar himself? Would his ambition ever have been satisfied? He dreamed of surpassing Alexander, but once he stood at the edge of the Pacific, what then? Would he have declared himself king of the world, or even a god among men? History tells us Caesar already flirted with divinity in Rome. With the entire known world under his control, might he have crowned himself not just emperor, but something more? Now pause and think of this. If Caesar had succeeded, there might never have been a Middle Ages. No fall of Rome. No dark centuries of fractured kingdoms. No long painful crawl back to global connection. Instead, a single empire might have carried humanity forward without interruption. Our world today, our technology, our politics, our very way of life, might be centuries more advanced. Or perhaps, the weight of empire would have stifled innovation, freezing the world beneath a rigid Roman order that lasted millennia without change. In the end, the truth is this: history is fragile. Caesar's assassination on the Ides of March was not just the death of a man, but the death of a possible future, one in which East and West were united centuries before globalization, one in which Rome's eagle might have flown not just over the Mediterranean, but over the entire world. And so, we return to the question we began with. What if Caesar had conquered the East? The answer is both awe-inspiring and haunting. A world united, yet perhaps suffocated. A future accelerated, yet uncertain. The Caesar who dreamed of Alexander's shadow might have given us a world entirely unlike the one we live in today. As we close this journey, let me leave you with one final thought. History is not just what happened, it's also what could have happened. And in the flicker of every choice, every dagger raised or spared, lies the power to shape worlds. Caesar's death gave us the history we know. His survival might have given us a history we can only imagine. So, the next time you walk down a road, use a calendar, or speak a word rooted in Latin. Remember, these are the echoes of a Rome that was, but somewhere, in the shadows of possibility, there lingers the Rome that might have been the Rome of Caesar's ultimate empire. If you enjoyed this journey into the what-ifs of history, make sure you subscribe, because here, we don't just tell the past, we imagine the worlds that could have been, and who knows what story we'll uncover next.